Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So Blizzard announced today there's some incoming class tuning coming out this upcoming reset, March 25th. Post race to world first. Now I fully expected this class tuning back to come now that the race has been over. I think three guilds are the only ones to kill it: Liquid Method and or Liquid Echo and Method in that order. So let's take a look. Let's go dive into all of the PvE class changes. I'm not looking at the PvP side. So we're going to start with obviously start at the top here. They're just making basically addressing over and underperforming specs, which makes sense. It's how they, to me, should balance the game. Although I wish they would do more to increase underperforming specs than they do bring down overperformers. So Frost Death Knight sees a straight up 4% ability increase damage. I actually think that's pretty fair if you look at the Warcraft logs. Not even looking at not even looking at Mythic. If you look at even just the heroic logs here, so let's do heroic. All bosses. You see Frost DK really down bad right now. So not surprised to see that Frost DK is seeing some struggles here. So the fact that it's getting a bump in its damage is not surprising. All right, Vengeance Demon Hunters. Deflecting spikes now causes demon spikes to increase parry chance by 10%, was 15%. So a small defensive nerf to Vengeance Demon Hunter, which is starting to find itself being the very much the top tank in Mythic Plus scenarios. And it's not even close. It's being the highest performer at something like 80% of the top timed runs in the world. I think it's over 10 plus. It's 80% of the tank meta right now. So we're seeing a very early dominance of Vengeance Demon Hunter, so this is just a very small defensive nerf. Don't think it's enough. I think they need to continue to look more at Vengeance Demon Hunter. Very powerful in Mythic Plus, but also very weak in Raid right now, so it's a little bit in a weird spot. Balance Druid gets a 30% increase to Wrath, a 5% damage increase to Starfire, and Lunar Calling increases Starfire's damage to its primary targets by 160% versus 100%. I actually think this is probably the perfect place to tune Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid, another spec that, right now, as you can see, it's kind of in that bottom third, but this is also a little bit of a misnomer because when you look at damage to, when you look at damage to bosses, Balanced Druid is very far down the path to the point that it's, closer to Augmentation Evoker than it is to Arms Warrior. So Balanced Druid has definitely seen itself struggle very much in the way of damage single target. It's very, very good in AoE, and Star Surge being, the main single target spender, Wrath being the main single target nuke that you cast. These are very, very good targeted things. And then the Elune Chosen build, they're getting a little help in Mythic Plus because this is where you play Elune's Chosen. Starfire getting more damage to its primary target, so whatever target you have targeted is considered your primary target. So you can still Starfire during during boss fights, and you're going to get just a little bit more targeted damage out there. Guardian, Druid of the Claw is getting some buffs, which I find kind of strange. I mean, it's not doing all that great in Raid from a tank perspective. It's middle of the pack, but it's not like Brewmaster and Prot Paladin are right now, so I find that a little bit odd that they're buffing Druid of the Claw, which is kind of the one that you play generally in the Raid build, but they're not doing anything to Elune's Chosen. So Dreadful Wound gets a damage increase by 20%. Empowered Shapeshifting increases swipe damage. They're doubling it from 6 to 12, and then increasing Mangle's damage from 15 to 25. And then Wild Power Surge's bonus rip damage was reduced to 200, down from 225. So basically what they're doing is they're trying to shift a little bit more of the damage into bear form and out of the full cat form. I think this is ultimately going to end up being not a big deal. I still think Bear Druid is going to struggle damage-wise. And like I said, Elune's Chosen needs a little bit of help, in my opinion, a little bit of touching to make the damage better there for Bear Druid. But overall, I think Guardian is a very solid tank right now. It's not the best. I think it's probably third or fourth best in the most optimal scenarios. But it is definitely in need. I mean, most of the tanks, with the exception of Prot Warrior and Blood DK, are in need of some Vengeance Demon Hunter. Like, you have your top three. There's Prot Warrior, Blood DK, and Vengeance. And then there's your bottom three, which is Bear, Paladin, and Brewmaster. Those bottom three really need a lot of help. Evoker. Devastation Evoker. So Evoker, a class that I've been looking at dabbling potentially in later on, but Survival Hunter has been calling me again. Fixed an issue where the final tick of Disintegrate would not benefit from Titanic Wrath or Iridescence while talented into Azure Celerity. That's been a bug that's been around for a while, I think. So the fact that they're only just now getting around to fixing it is both disappointing, but finally, hey, a good thing. Developers' notes. They basically are nerfing the Narrowbar tier set bonus because Devastation Evokers didn't want to take it. Blizzard hates that. They've always hated that. And I think they should hate that. That's a good thing. So they nerfed it down to 1 second on Shattering Star and Eternity Surge instead of 4. And then they buffed the 2-piece to be 100% effectiveness instead of 50% effectiveness when you cast Shattering Star on your 2-piece. It also triggers 25% more frequently, so straight up damage buff for Devastation Evoker. And then it gets a small piece of increases the damage of your next power spell by 25% per stack versus 20% per stack. So just some straight up damage buffs for Devastation. Now, Devastation, another spec that I think is very much underrated. We saw one on pretty much every fight. It is kind of upper middle of the pack. I would expect it to become one of the best range here with Athlock, Shadow, and Fire Mage. Although we'll talk about those in a little bit. But I think Devastation Evoker is going to shoot up probably here to that Outlaw Arms Warrior place. It's a very, very much a top damage dealer. So I'm very, very excited to have it around. And I love Devastation. I've always liked Devastation. Augmentation. After our last round of tuning, we're pleased with Augmentation's support capabilities as that's the strength of the spec. However, their personal damage contribution is a little lower than we'd like. We're buffing their personal damage to bring their overall output up without further increasing their support contributions. So they're just doing a flat damage tuning on their spells itself. It's still going to make them, it's probably going to take them from about here to about here. So it's still going to be by far the lowest damage, but that's not what Augmentation is brought to Raid for. Does this mean it finds its way in creeping back into the meta, which is everyone's fears anytime they buff Augmentation? I don't think so. I think you might see like a very top tier Augmentation Evoker will probably find his way around. I'm thinking of someone like, God, I can't remember his name now. Ryerson. Ryerson's a very top tier Evoker player. He might find his, he's obviously going to play his way into probably these upper level keys if he hasn't already. Or Kess. Is it Kess that I'm thinking of? Might be Kess that I'm thinking of. So these guys are definitely going to, find their way in, but now your more standard Augmentation Evoker is probably someone that enjoys the spec but is not necessarily a top tier player. They're going to benefit more from these changes. I don't think it makes Augmentation a big part of your high key pushing meta comps. You're not going to be forced to play it. In fact, I still think Devastation is going to be better. Preservation Evoker. Preservation Evoker, one of my favorite raid healers, actually. I don't really like it in keys because I think it struggles really with single target healing. It's spur single target healing in particular. Because you always have to have a ramp going, basically, and your ramps always involve healing the entire group. So it's a little bit weird to play Preservation in keys, in my opinion, but I love it in Raid. It's right there with Mistweaver Monk as among my favorite specs to play as a healer in Raid. So the Narrowbar tier set was also too strong, so reducing its effectiveness and improving Preservation's output overall with some targeted changes to improve performance in Raid and Mythic Plus. So it's now getting a drop on its 4-piece from 10 to 5 from Narrowbar Palace, but getting a flat 5% healing buff. Also, Spirit Bloom is getting a big heal. Now, that's one of your big burst heals if you empower it at multiple targets, but at rank 1 in power, it's a very good single target heal targeted onto like your tanks and stuff, and you can echo that onto your tank, and it's really good burst or a target that's taking a lot of single target damage. So the fact that they're buffing that is good. Energizing Flame refunds 80% of the mana cost of Living Flame when used to attack an enemy target instead of 50%. Energizing Flame through the Flame Shaper builds. I'm not a big fan of the Flame Shaper builds. I really like the way Chrono Warden feels, but for those of you that are playing Flame Shaper, good little buff there. Disintegrate damage is increased by 25% for Preservation, and Living Flame damage is increased by 25% for Preservation. So it's going to do a little bit more single target damage in Mythic Plus. I kind of wish they would increase the healing on Living Flame as well. They have to be careful, though, because if they buff Living Flame's healing too much, it just becomes the number one spell you cast, and you ignore the rest of the kit, which is very, very cool. So I understand why they are hesitant to do it, but I would like to see Living Flame become a little bit more impactful as a heal. Hunter. Beast Mastery Hunter is getting some changes. Like, so far we've hit a lot of specs. Feral hasn't been touched. Unholy and Blood weren't touched. Havoc wasn't touched, but quite a few other ones. Beastmaster is performing well, but we have a few planned changes to address some quality of life issues as well as address a few bug fixes. So Black Arrow is getting a dot duration increase from 10 to 14 seconds. Withering Fire now prioritizes enemies that do not have Black Arrow's periodic effect. That's very good. Pack Leader gets a bug fix that prevented lead from the front from increasing Pack Leader's bore damage, and the Withering Fire now fires 4 additional Black Arrows versus 2. That's a really, really good quality of life for Black Arrow AoE. Beastmaster has been playing almost purely Pack Leader so far this patch. Hopefully maybe some of these changes will help bring Black Arrow into the mix a little bit, whether it's a 50-50 optional choice or you play one in Raid, one in Mythic Plus. We'll see. Beast Mastery gurus, I'm sure, will tell me. I'm a survival guru, at least of the hunter specs that I play the most of. Survival's the one I know the best. So I don't speak as an expert on BM or MM, but survival, I like to consider myself a advanced intermediate, if that makes any sense. So BM Hunter fans, tell me, does this mean it should be playing some Black Arrow again? Survival. They're increasing the frequency and power of Pack Leader summons for survival to help make this tier talent tree more appealing. So all damage is being dealt increased by 4%. So again, if we look at the statistics, Survival Hunter down here near the bottom, Beast Mastery right middle of the pack basically, which is where you want it to be generally. So good tuning for survival. I like that. Of course, I'm never upset that survival is getting a damage buff. Pack Leader Dire summons kill command cooldown reduction is 2 seconds now instead of 1. The bear and the boar both get damage increases by 40%. Howl of the Pack Leader duration was reduced to 25 seconds versus 30 seconds, probably to offset the increased damage a little bit. And then, of course, got the same bug fix with preventing the boar damage increase. Overall, definitely makes Pack Leader a lot more viable. I don't know, obviously, I have to get in and really play with the numbers, but or I'll let Dolby or Time Indie do it. But it looks like Pack Leader might be a viable option because right now we've been playing purely Sentinel right now. So, good thing. All right, Marksmanship. Dark Ranger's performance is lower than expected, so we're making some substantial tuning changes to bring them closer to what we'd expect. We'd like Phantom Pain to be a more compelling source of damage and worth playing around in Mythic Plus and AoE scenarios, especially when combined with True Shot and Withering Fire. So Explosive Shot getting a 15% damage increase, Volley getting a damage increase, Black Arrow getting a damage increase, the periodic effect getting the same buff to 14 seconds. Phantom Pain damage share is now 24% versus 8%, so they buffed that by 300%. Very nice, or 400%. 8 times 4 is 24. Bleak Powder damage increased by 100%, and Withering Fire now prioritizes. So a lot of the same changes that BM got with some extra changes for MM. So I've got a couple of MM lovers in my guild, so they're going to be very happy with this. I still think Marksmanship has probably a flow issue. I've not played it all that much, because again, I'm a survival lover. But I've heard complaints that Marksman feels like it has a flow issue. That said, I still haven't tried it out. I'm going to give it a shot as I play the character. I'm still obviously focused on Monk, Druid, and now Mage most recently. So we'll see. Speaking of Mage, Arcane gets an 8% damage increase. Frost gets a 4% damage increase, and Fire gets a 3% damage reduction. Obviously, Fire a little bit of an outlier here spec-wise, so this tuning is not bad, but then Arcane and Fire are both at the very bottom. I think this is probably if everything else stayed the same, Fire and Arcane would move, or Frost and Arcane would move up just a little bit. That said, it doesn't fix Arcane's fundamental problems that they have with when to use Arcane Barrage. It's very complex, and Frost has a pretty good flow and playstyle. I wish they would do something with Spellslinger to make it more appealing. Because right now we're playing almost pure Frostfire. All right, Monk. I knew this was going to be coming. I called this quite a while ago. All damage decreased by 4%, and Slicing Winds got a damage increase to 20%. Both of these don't apply to PvP. So 4% damage reduction is probably good. Windwalker is an outstanding single target spec. Little concerned about how it impacts AoE. Windwalker AoE wasn't stellar, but it was good enough. And then Slicing Winds getting a 20% damage increase is just trying to utilize it more. It probably becomes the default over Sith Lightning in PvP. Mistweaver's getting a 25% damage decrease. Yeah, that doesn't shock me at all. If you look at this, this is busted. This should not happen. So, not surprised that Mistweaver Monk is getting a damage reduction. However, they are doing some other tweaking. Jadefire Teachings is getting an increased Ancient Teaching transfer amount to 215%. versus 160, so not a PvP thing. Spinning Crank Kick does get a damage increase, so it makes it more appealing in AoE situations, and also to combine with this to make it better healing conversion. And then Jade Fire now transfers 120% of the damage versus 110% of the damage. Brewmaster actually gets some patch notes. They know the spec exists. Hooray! 3% to all ability damage. I don't know if that's enough. I would have liked to have seen maybe a 5% aura buff. Again, because Brewmaster is like by far the worst damage tank right now. I don't know if 3% is enough. Now, they did make the Blackout Kick better off the set bonus, which we'll have to see how that impacts things. It could end up being a net gain to roughly that 5% damage increase, but I'm not convinced. I would like to see Brewmaster maybe gotten a little bit more of a damage increase. Defensively, amazingly, they're actually a lot better, especially with Master of Harmony being a lot better to play in terms of quality of life. So I'm optimistically curious about the Brewmaster changes. I'm not surprised by the Mistweaver and Windwalker changes at all. I kind of called it they were coming. I'd recorded a video. I'll have to re-record it now about why there were so many monks in Race to World First. And I said in the initial recording that we'll never see the light of day now that that these two specs were going to catch some nerfs. Because I mean, when there's 5 of them in a raid, it says a lot. Paladin. Holy Paladin throughput has been below our target, so we're combining an overall buff with target increases to a few spells that feel particularly more impactful. So 3% aura buff, Word of Glory and Eternal Flame gets an additional 20%, Light of Dawn an additional 20%, AoE healing on Holy Prism an additional 30%, its single target healing and damage increase by an additional 50%, and then it gets a Shield of the Righteous damage increase as well. I'll have to talk to my Holy Paladin friend about this. This all seems good. I mean, anytime you're just getting straight up buffs, no nerfs, that's never a bad thing. Holy Paladins have definitely been in the dumpster about where the spec is at. And I know a lot of people like want to play it, but just don't because it's just not very good right now. And the Holy Paladins that are playing it, they're playing it because they just are diehards or they really, really like it. Or in the case of the Holy Paladin in my guild, he just also likes playing Ret. He finds the specs very understandable for him and doesn't really want to learn anything new. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need those types of players in the game. And then Final Verdict gets an increase by 20%. Final Verdict, the alternative to Templar's Verdict, I believe. It's potentially making that a good option there. We'll see. Ret Paladins, let me know. Holy Priest is going to get increased healing from weaker spells and talents, and then they're tuning up Oracle to improve its viability. So Prayer of Healing, Prayer of Mending gets a 25 and 20%. Renew Healing increased by 60%. Light Well increased by 30%. Divine Image increased by 20%. Divine Image damage increased by 20%. Holy Fire damage increased by 20%. Renewed Faith now increases healing done to allies with Renew by 10 instead of 6%. Renews from Empowered Renew now heal for 120% more than a normal Renew versus 60, so a full 100% buff on that. An Oracle Preemptive Care now increases the duration of Renew by 40%, so long renews through Oracle. It also increases the healing of Prayer of Mending by 40% and increases the damage of Smite, Holy Fire, and Holy Nova by 40%. So overall, I think they're just trying to make Holy Priest better than what it is in Raid from a healing perspective. The healers are like, there's very much a gap. Holy Paladin and Holy Priest fall behind these other 4 specs in a pretty harsh way. But the big thing with Holy Priest is that they have almost no viability in Mythic Plus. And so I think doing things like making Prayer of Mending better, making Holy Fire do more damage, making Renew better to where you can spread that out onto your group. I think those are all targeted changes to really help the spec feel better in Mythic Plus to play. I don't mind Holy Priest at all. I've dabbled with it a little bit. It's, I would put it probably right there. There's a gap between Mistweaver and Evoker, but I would put it at my 3rd favorite healer to play. So good to see it get some buffs. I know quite a few people in some of the Discords I'm in are already happy to see Holy Priest. They love Holy Priest. It's very simple, very straightforward, but also has a very powerful fantasy behind it. So it's a popular healer. Shadow's getting a 3% damage nerf. Again, not surprising if we look at the damage you saw. Shadow Priest was right up there at the top of the tree here. So 3% damage nerf touches it a little bit, but not enough that you're going to, want to have all your Shadow Priest reroll. Discipline is getting a little bit of a nerf to lenience with DR going to 2% instead of 3%. And then it does 32% of damage done versus 35% of damage done. So slight nerfs to Discipline. Nothing that I think is going to break it. It's still going to be probably quite good in keys, although the very highest keys, there's already been questions about whether disc will hold up. But I think if you're just an average discipline police enjoyer or someone that dabbles in the spec quite a bit, you're not going to notice these a lot. Discipline is still very much I think one of the most skill-based healers, where if you hit the skill shots and the ramps just right, you're going to look really good, and if you don't, you're going to look really bad. Alright, Assassination's getting a nerf to its 2-piece bonus from Nerebar Palace to reduce the tincture stacks to 5 from 10, but it is getting a 3% damage increase, with Mutilate and Ambush specifically getting 40% increases, so just trying to help its single target with a little bit of AoE buff there with the ability 3% or a buff. Alright, Elemental Shaman struggling in Season 2 single target damage in particular. Primordial Wave in Season 2 left them feeling a bit lackluster, so they're increasing the damage of several core spells and increasing the damage of Maelstrom Generation of Primordial Wave. So 8% on Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, Ice Fury, and Frost Shock. Good core target spells to hit that are not AoE, so good single target buffs there. Primordial Wave now generates 4 times the Maelstrom that it used to 12 versus 3. And Primordial Wave's initial damage is increased by 500%. So, hey, guess what, Ellie? You're probably back to playing Primordial Wave. Restoration's getting some bug fixes, it looks like. Totemic Projection was applying insurance while using Surging Totem. That's not nice. Give that back to them. That's all they had. But they're getting an insurance flat buff healing. I don't think it fixes Resto Shaman's core issues, but it is one that makes the spec probably a little bit more balanced fight to fight. Demonology getting a 3% damage increase. That's fine. I love Demonology, so I'm okay with that. I'm really surprised they didn't touch Affliction. Very surprised they didn't touch Affliction. And then Prot Warrior was doing by far the most damage. In fact, we saw on the 6 Bunk Junker kill for Liquid that Scott, the Prot Warrior, was number 1 on the damage meters. Now, a lot of the damage was quote-unquote fake because he was rounding up ads, but Prot Warrior was doing a lot of damage. So Shield Slam's getting a reduction. Shield Slam and Revenge getting reduced from 10% to down from 20%. One against many's reduced 3% per target. Tide of the Battle's down to 7% versus 10%. And then Mountain Thane gets a small bonus to Shield Slam damage from 15 to 10%. So overall, most of these classes I'm not surprised that they touched. There are some classes that I'm surprised they did not touch. I'm surprised they didn't touch anything with Feral Druid, but they seem to like where it's at. I'm surprised they didn't really touch anything with Affliction Warlock is the one I'm most surprised about. But, you know, Warlock's always got to be on top, right? And I would have liked to have seen more done with particularly the struggling mage specs, Survival Hunter, and maybe even a little bit more with Ret, although the 3% aura buff might be better. I'm curious to see how this is going to do overall for the changes. I'm sure over the next couple of weeks into early April, we'll get a lot more data on this. But let me know, are you happy with the class changes overall? If you're looking at it from a big picture, did your spec get buffed? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Until the next video, I hope you all stay safe. Hope you're enjoying yourself. You're having fun. You keep on gaming. And we'll see you next time.